Hello everybody and welcome back to another Path of Exile 1 video. Today we're going to be doing a high budget build showcase for the Blight of Contagion Occultist in patch 3.26. This build uses a transfigured version of a skill gem we unlock at level 2 called Blight, and Blight is a channeling skill that deals chaos damage over time to enemies in a frontal cone. It does this by applying a stacking debuff to the enemies, meaning that the longer you channel, the more stacks you inflict, and the more damage you will deal. The biggest difference between regular Blight and Blight of Contagion is its ability to spread the damaging debuff to nearby enemies using the Contagion skill. This means that with enough investment into damage, area of effect, and monster pack density, we can eviscerate multiple screens of enemies with one cast. Some other minor differences between the two skills is that regular Blight can stack up to 20 layers of the damaging debuff, whereas Blight of Contagion can only have up to 6 stacks. The TLDR of this is that regular Blight is more suitable for single target damage, whereas Blight of Contagion is better suited for clearing packs of enemies in maps. With the basic skill overview out of the way, it's now time to address the first elephant in the room, and that is Blight of Contagion is a 2-button build. Or is it? Traditionally, Blight of Contagion is played with 2 buttons, one button for Blight of Contagion and the second button for Contagion. So our gameplay loop looks a little like this. You walk up to a pack of monsters, you channel Blight of Contagion, and then you cast Contagion, and then everything on the screen dies. Now the problem is you need to do this multiple times during a map, and quite frankly, that sounds exhausting. But with a few clever tricks, we're able to automate the casting of Contagion, turning this build into a 1-button build where you can simply walk up to a pack of monsters, channel your Blight of Contagion, and then everything on the screen dies. We're going to do a deep dive on how to automate Contagion in the gearing section of this video, but if you want some spoilers, we're using a crafted wand using the incursion prefix that triggers socketed spell gems when you use your skills. As you can see, I do not have Contagion on my skill bar. In fact, the last time I had to manually cast Contagion was during the campaign before I got my trigger wand set up. The second elephant in the room is the budget of the build. As you can see, I have a 4 Flask Mageblood equipped. This Mageblood is doing a lot for our character, but the main reason I got it is because without it, our character is extremely slow and very sluggish. In fact, I had to pinch myself and make sure I didn't log into Path of Exile 2 instead, because at 19% movement speed modifier, that's exactly what it feels like. Alright, so what is our Mageblood doing for us? It's making sure that our Quicksilver Flask and our Silver Flask are always active. This puts our base movement speed at 174%. It is also giving us permanent onslaught, meaning we attack and cast faster, and then once we put in our other flask, we also have permanent phasing, meaning we can walk through enemy monsters. Alright, so the Mageblood here is almost entirely all utility. It's just giving you so much mobility on your character, so much quality of life. It makes mapping feel good, whereas if you were to play this without the Mageblood, I think the most you can expect out of this build is a 4 Watchstone run and maybe some entry-level T16 mapping strategy. With that out of the way, let's talk about damage and defenses. Well, I don't have an exact number for you guys. What I do have is in-game demonstrations of me doing some single-target DPS. So here is a clip of me fighting the normal Maven. And here is a clip of me fighting the boss from T17 Fortress with no defense, resist, or life modifiers on the map. Keep in mind that we do have the Mercenary active, which means the bosses in these clips have 50% more life than they otherwise normally would. All in all, I think our single target damage is quite respectable. It's not going to be one of those builds that hits dot cap. You're not going to be instant phasing uber pinnacle bosses. That's not what the character is designed for. What it is designed for is fast mapping, a lot of screen clear, and having just enough damage to blast the boss at the end without being stuck there for an eternity. Some of the content I've done on this character includes the Uber Pinnacle bosses. We've done Depth 600 Delve, we've done Wave 15 Simulacrum, we've done Titanic Exiles, we have done a bunch of other strategies, including some of the Risk Scarab ones that are currently meta right now, but I do want to warn you that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Alright, remember there are going to be other builds that are going to excel at any one of these things that I mentioned in the list. Try and stick to doing content which the build can do efficiently, which is any content that requires you to kill tons and tons of monsters. For our defensive layers, we have 8,300 energy shield, almost 31,000 evasion rating, we have 23% chance to block attacks, we have 75% chance to block spell damage, 100% chance to suppress spell damage, we have immunity to chaos damage from the Chaos Inoculation Keystone, we have stun immunity from our Ascendency, and elemental ailment immunity from the Storm Shroud unique jewel. We are also taking 75% reduced damage from enemy critical strikes. We have 100% reduced effectiveness of curses, we have energy shield regeneration from the Zealot's Oath Keystone, we have energy shield recover when hit from the Ghost Dance Keystone, and we have damage over time mitigation from the Leith Shade Keystone. Quite honestly, there is a lot going on in terms of defenses for this character, but that doesn't mean we're immortal. The Achilles heel of this build is going to be physical damage. More specifically, your max phase hit is going to be abysmally low, so please don't try to tank things like the Shaper Slam. You will get one shot. The best defense in this case is to simply not get hit. Use your mobility, walk out of the way, and you're good to go.
Irrelevant!
So how exactly are we scaling our damage and defenses? Well, like any good build, we are feeding two birds with one scone by stacking power charges. Here's a list of all of the different modifiers I get from having one power charge on my build. 20% spell damage, 24% generic damage, 6% increased AoE, 5% chance to block spell damage, 3% more spell damage, and 8% mana regeneration rate. We run 10 power charges on this build, so take everything I said and multiply it by 10, and you're left with 200% spell damage, 240% generic damage, 60% increased AoE, 50% chance to block spells, 30% more spell damage, and 80% increased mana regeneration rate. It is crazy how efficient power charge stacking is at scaling both your damage and defenses in patch 3.26. Alright, now it's time to get into the gearing section of the video. We're going to start by talking about the unique items that allow us to do power charge stacking. First up, we have the Willclash Golden Mask unique. This is going to give us evasion and energy shield, and more importantly, 5% chance to block spell damage per power charge. It also has a negative effect that you lose all power charges when you block, but don't worry, we're going to negate that using another unique item. The item also has a couple of other interactions with power charges, like increased elemental damage per power charge, but we don't care about that because we are playing a chaos damage over time build. So while you're trying to get this item, all you need to focus on is having a high evasion and energy shield rating, and if you have the money for it, make sure to get the +1 to maximum power charges corruption. Unfortunately, that is a very expensive and lucrative corruption. There are a lot of builds right now in the meta that use this helmet and use power charges, so expect to pay maybe a dozen divines or more for the corrupted version of this hat. Next up, we have Malachai Malachai's Loop Harmonic Spirit Shield. This is a shield that gives us +2 to maximum power charges. It also gives us up to 16% increased spell damage per power charge. Okay, this rolls from 12 to 16, so if you're buying this item, make sure to get one that has 16. Okay, you want max roll on that mod. Alright, it also has a big negative effect where you lose all power charges on reaching maximum power charges, and then you get shocked when that happens. Okay, so this is another big net negative that we are going to overcome by using our next next unique item. But before we talk about that, also try and get yourself a good corruption on this shield. In this case, I have take 25% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Okay, that is where we're getting a little bit of crit mitigation on this build. Our next item allows us to use the previous two items without having to deal with their downsides, and of course I am talking about Ralakesh's Impatience Riveted Boots. This is a pair of unique boots that gives you cold resist, chaos resist, movement speed, corrupted blood immunity, and most importantly, it treats your character as having a maximum number of power charges. Okay, there are 3 variants of this boots, one for each charge. The one we want, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is treating our characters having a maximum number of power charges. Okay guys, if I take off these boots, you'll see here in the top left corner of my screen, my power charges goes from 1 all the way to 10, and then it goes back to 1, and then this keeps on happening. Okay, while that is occurring, you'll see that all of our stacking power charge modifiers is ramping up, and then it resets and it ramps up again. We cannot play the character like this, it's going to get us killed. Okay, as soon as I put Ralakesh on, you'll see that my character is treated as having a maximum of 10 power charges. So instead of fluctuating, our character's defenses and offensive capabilities is always at maximum. So Ralakesh count as having maximum number of power charges. The chaos resistance roll does not matter since we are CI. Try to get a pair of boots with a maximum move speed and high cold resistance, and if you have the money for it, you can get this corrupted with increased movement speed as well. Oh, and one other note guys, even with Ralakesh on, you'll see that our character has the fluctuating power charges on the UI. This is a visual bug. Okay, you are always treated as having max, even if this thing is counting up from 1 all the way to 10. Next up, we can talk about the Amulet. This is Replica Dragonfang's Flight Onyx Amulet. It has been corrupted, so you can apply an additional curse. You don't need the corrupted version. All it allows us to do is use an additional curse with our Bane setup. Alright, if you don't have the added curse, you can just use a damage support on Bane instead. So the corruption here, very nice to have, but you want this to give you +3 to all level of Blight gems. This also applies to our Blight of Contagion setup. Alright, try to get a amulet with high roll on elemental resist and increased reservation efficiency of skills. The reduced attribute requirements for items is also nice. It helps us use our items because a lot of these items have a lot of high stat requirements. Like you can see here, the Twilight Regalia is 293 int requirement. So without this amulet, I actually wouldn't have enough int to use this chest. Okay, you're going to want to anoint this with Inveterate. This is a passive in the ranger side of the tree. Let me see if I can find it. It's going to cost you 2 blacks and 1 golden oil. It's going to give you 15% chance to suppress spell damage, and it's going to help you mitigate a little bit more of that damage when spell suppression occurs. Alright, our next unique item is the Fated End POW ring. This is a very simple ring that I didn't even know existed until I went to make this build. What it does is it interacts with our curses. Any non-aura hexes you inflict on enemies gain curse effectiveness as the curse matures. Alright, what this means is that there is a ramping effect to your curses. When you first inflict them, they're going to be quite weak, but the longer they exist on the enemy, the stronger they get, and by the time they are at max effectiveness, it usually lines up with when your curses need to be refreshed, and that's how this ring works. It's going to give us a lot of single target damage, and that's why we're using this ring. If I have a clip of how the ramping effect works, I will play that now. Probably I'm going to go into a curse reflect map and then put a curse on myself, and then you can see the effects of the ramping curse. Next up is our big budget item, which is of course Mageblood. You're going to want one that has the 4 leftmost magic utility flasks are constantly applied to your character. It'd be nice to get one with high dexterity and high resistances, but beggars can't really be choosers. If you have the money to get a high rolled Mageblood, then by all means go ahead and do that. The flasks, we need to talk about flasks, guys. We use a Jade flask for evasion, a Quicksilver flask for movement speed, a Silver flask for onslaught, and a Quartz flask for spell suppression and phasing. Alright, and for you credit card Andes, I know you guys exist. I see you on Reddit all the time linking your builds and your POBs with Mageblood, but you don't know how to roll your flask. Alright, you're going to get a flask level 85 or above, and then you're going to turn it into a magic item with an Orb of Transmutation. Then you're going to alt spam until you get a suffix you want. So let's go ahead and do that. In this case, we didn't get a suffix, we got a 25% increased effect prefix instead. When this happens, you can aug it and see if you land on a suffix you need. Okay, we got crit chance, which is not what we need, so we go back to alt spamming. Alright, here is a flask with the additional elemental resistance roll on it. Let's go ahead and Orb of Augmentation. Alright, we did not get the increased flask effect. Right, we can annul and try again if we keep our suffix. So let's go ahead and aug it. Alright, still no luck. You just keep doing this. If you lose the suffix, you go back to alt spamming. Alright, here is an example of a usable flask. We got the increased evasion rating during effect mod. We have 25% increased effect. Alright, you can continue alt spamming this until you get a higher tier of the evasion suffix, but this is good enough for a demo. What you do next is you take Enkindling Orb, and then you're going to use this until you get 70% increased effect enchantment. And there it is. There is your usable Mageblood flask. You don't even need to quality it. Quality just increases the duration, and that is how it is done. Moving on from the unique items, let's talk about the rare crafted items that this build uses. We can start with the easiest craft, and that is going to be your gloves. You want to start with an evasion energy shield base that has a fractured chance to suppress spell damage. You're going to roll for the socketed gems, deal 30% more damage over time suffix using the essence of Delirium. These are probably a little bit expensive, but you're going to want to spam this until you get it alongside a high resistance. So in this case, we have fire resist. If you get cold or lightning, that's okay too. You can use the Horticrafting bench to flip that resistance into one that you want. Okay, that is going to give you all three suffixes that this glove uses. It's going to give you the fractured spell suppression, the essence mod that deals more damage over time, and then you're also going to get your suffix that is the resistance. What you do next is you use Eldritch Currency. So you go to the Exotic Currency tab, you're going to make it so that the Searing Exarch is dominant, and then you're going to use Eldritch Chaos Orb to fix your prefixes on the item. Okay, this could take a couple of attempts, but once you have your prefixes in a happy spot, you can put on a benchcraft, and then you're going to want to do the Eldritch Implicits on the item. So you want the chance to suppress spell damage from Eater of Worlds, and then you want Chaos damage over time multiplier from the Searing Exarch. Next up, we have the Energy Shield armor we are using for this character. This one is a pretty straightforward craft to do using Recombinators. I do have clips of this. I might be playing it while I speak. The goal here is to get an item with 3 T1 Energy Shield prefixes. Once we have that, we can do the same trick we did with the gloves. You can use Eldritch Implicits and Exotic Currency, so the Eldritch Chaos Orb with Eater of Worlds dominant to reroll the suffix modifiers. Okay, so you're going to use Recombinators for the prefix, and then you're going to use Eldritch Currency for the suffix, and once you're happy with what you have, you can fix your Eldritch Implicits just the same way we did with the gloves. What I recommend here is that you use Flasks applied to you of increased effect, and percentage of physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage. Alright, I'll leave it up to you as to whether or not you want to upgrade those modifiers using the Orb of Conflict. All in all, we got a energy shield base that has almost 1300 energy shield. Alright, the enchantment where we get 8% increased explicit defense modifiers comes from using tailoring orbs from the heist mechanic. That one's a cherry on top. You don't need to do it. It's just going to make it a even better armor. Alright, since everyone's suffix is going to look different than mine, what I recommend is you have one resist, and then you have either intelligence or reduced attribute requirement, and then you can put on a chance to suppress spell damage benchcraft to finish the item off. Alright, next up is the Sorrow Knuckle Nameless Ring. This is a essence crafted ring. I'm basically using it for stats on this character. So let me see, if I open up my stat page, you'll see here that we need a lot of strength and dexterity. Most of it is coming from our Mageblood, but also this Nameless Ring. So what we did is we used the Essence of Sorrow to guarantee a dexterity mod, and then we spammed it until it came alongside a strength modifier. Okay, these suffixes are the only ones that matter. If you have an open suffix slot, you can benchcraft +1/2 minimum frenzy charges. That will be a nice DPS boost. The prefixes on this item don't really matter. I guess if you get mana or energy shield, or if you have an open prefix you wanted to craft damage on, all of that works. It's really up to you. The reason we use a nameless ring is because it gives you 50% reduced effect of curses on you. This combined with a little trick we are doing on our passive skill tree using tattoos gives us 100% reduced effectiveness of curses, making us curse immune. And now it's time to talk about the wand that this build uses. This is what makes our one button setup possible. Right, the most important mod on this item is the trigger a socketed spell on using a skill with a 4-second cooldown mod. This is the incursion of Takati's prefix. It also comes with increased spell damage, which is very nice. Alright, I took that mod, I isolated it on an item I bought from someone, and then I recombinated it with +1 to chaos spell skills and +1 to all spell skill gems. That gave us a wand with 3 prefixes. If I have a clip of that, I will play that now. Once you have your prefixes set, you can use meta crafting to fix your suffixes. So what I did was prefixes cannot be changed, and then we do a Veiled Chaos Orb until we get chaos damage over time. Then we need to do a YOLO Crusader's Exalted Orb Slam and hope we hit the increased damage per power charge mod. That is going to give us a lot of damage, of course. And then you finish this craft off by doing a bench craft for increased cast speed and a chance to gain Arcane Surge when you kill an enemy. That is a lot of steps, that is a lot of ways that this item can go wrong. You could lose a lot of money trying to craft something like this. So I'm going to give you the budget version, isolate the incursion mod, and then recombine it with +1 of all chaos spell skill gems. That's going to give you a 2 prefix item. What you're going to do is take it to the crafting bench, you're going to multi-mod it, and then you're going to put on chaos damage over time, as well as the increased cast speed and chance to gain Arcane Surge on kill. Okay, that is going to be your budget wand that gives you access to the 1-button playstyle with a Blight of Contagion. Right, you can also use the Harvest Horticrafting Station to change the quality so we get increased area of effect for quality, and then the base you're going to use for this is of course the Prophecy Wand for increased spell damage. Okay, so that is all of the items that this build uses, at least the ones we have equipped. We also have a lot of jewels on the character, but we'll talk about that in the passive section of the video. Right, and something I did forget to talk about, guys, is the catalysts on our accessories. For the ring and the Mageblood, we are using attribute catalysts, alright, just to help us get more attributes for our build. We don't have any catalyst on the amulet since it was corrupted. You can use tainted catalyst and try to get the elemental resistances to go up if you'd like. Now it's time to talk about the gems and supports for this build. We're going to start off by talking about Blight of Contagion, our primary skill. This has been double corrupted to have level 21 and 23 quality. Guys, I wasn't kidding about it being a high budget build. You're going to see a common theme here. Most of my support gem and active skill gems have been corrupted or double corrupted just for that extra min-max. Of course, you do not have to do the same. Try and prioritize plus gem levels above plus quality. So if you can get a 2120 Blight of Contagion, that is good enough. Okay, so Blight of Contagion, then we have Infused Channeling Support. This deals more damage with channeling skills, and you take less damage while channeling your skills from hits. Then we have Awakened Control Destruction Support. This is going to give us more spell damage, and it's also going to give us a chance to unnerve enemies for 4 seconds on hit, but unfortunately, Blight does not hit, and therefore we cannot proc Unnerve, so make sure you don't check Unnerve as active if you are fiddling around with the POB configuration. Okay, it does not work with Blight of Contagion. Next up, we have Focus Channeling. This is an interesting support. It was newly added to patch 3.26. It doesn't have any damage at first. Instead, you gain damage while channeling your skills. So the longer I hold down Contagion, the more damage I will do. It does have a downside of costing more mana the longer you channel. So to mitigate this, we have an Enduring Divine Mana Flask. So I pop my Mana Flask and then I can channel my Contagion, or what we have to do is we have to channel for a bit, and then we have to stop, and then we have to let our mana recover, and then rinse and repeat. Okay, if you don't like that micromanagement of the focused channeling, you can instead use Efficacy Support here. It's going to give you more damage over time, or you can use an Empower, and you can pump up the gem level on Blight of Contagion even more than it is. Next up, we have Awakened Void Manipulation Support. This is going to give us 40% more chaos damage and a +1 level of supported chaos skill gems. Okay, and then we have Awakened Swift Affliction. This is going to give us 50% more damage over time at the cost of making our damage over time have 25% less duration. But it gives you so much damage that you basically don't have a choice. You need to be using this, or your single target damage is going to be poop. Right, combined with Replica Dragonfang's Flight, our Blight of Contagion has 27 gem levels. That is quite sufficient. You can pump this up even higher. We'll talk about that later. And then let's talk about how we automate Contagion next. So in our trigger wand, we have a level 1 Contagion with 20% quality, connected to increased area of effect and enhance support. Enhance is giving us quality, which is increasing the base radius of the skill, and then Awakened increased area of effect is also giving us increased AoE. You want to maximize the amount of area of effect your Contagion has, so we can clear multiple screens at a time. The reason we're using a level 1 Contagion is because every time this trigger wand procs, the mana cost is 150 more than it normally would be. So if you try to increase the gem level here, you'll see that we don't have a lot of mana left. You will end up burning through your mana and then you can't cast Blight. It's just a miserable experience. Also, if you want to run Risk Scarabs, sometimes you end up with a map where you cannot regenerate mana, so we want to be really conscientious about how much mana we're spending and why. Since Contagion is purely utility, you can use a low level Contagion and it is going to function just fine. So you might be thinking that the trigger wand only occurs once every 4 seconds. What about all the time in between? Do we just kind of sit around and cast Blight? No, that's why we have our Contagiency plan. We have a low level cast from damage taken support connected to a low level Contagion. Basically the logic works like this: if your wand trigger is up, you walk up to the monster, you cast Blight, the Contagion triggers, and they die. If the wand is on cooldown, then you cast Blight, they're probably still alive, they're going to damage you, that's going to proc Contagion, and then they're going to die. The next thing we can talk about is the gems in our helmet. Here I've gone with the aura we are using for this character. This is going to be a little bit confusing. We are using Zealotry on this character as our primary aura because our Mercenary is providing us with Grace and Malevolence. If you do not have the Mercenary set up, you're going to want to swap out Zealotry for Malevolence and Grace instead, okay? So use your brain here, don't use Zealotry if you don't have another source of Grace and Malevolence. These two auras are more important for our character, and we're getting them through the Mercenary. Right, so here is Zealotry connected to Discipline. This one is a must, it's giving us EHP. This is a Vol Discipline actually. So Vol Discipline we are using as a substitute for a healing potion. Anytime you think you're going to take a ton of damage or need to regenerate your energy shield in a pinch, proc Vol Discipline, it's going to function as a health potion. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Then we have Summon Skitterbots here. Summon Skitterbots is going to have these little two minions running around. One is going to apply Chill, the other is going to apply Shocked. It's just going to give us a little bit more damage against single target enemies. Then we have a level 4 Enlightened support connected to our aura setup, so we can have a little bit more mana left to spend. And then we can talk about our shield charge mobility setup on our Malachai's Loop Shield. We have 20% shield charge connected to momentum and faster attack support. Then we have our curse setup with Bane in our Essence Crafted Gloves. So Bane is a skill gem that applies a chaos damage debuff on enemies, and the debuff scales alongside the curses that are applied with the skill. So when you connect a curse to this skill, it's going to apply the curse and the damage over time debuff. Alright, if you have a +1 to curse amulet like I do, you can put 3 curses into your Bane setup. We have Despair to lower enemy chaos resist, we have Temporal Chains to make our damage over time last longer, and then we have Punishment to make enemies take increased damage while they are on low life. If you do not have the +1 to curses amulet, you can remove Temporal Change, so you're left with Despair and Punishment, and for this green slot you can put in Awakened Void Manipulation support. That is going to give you a little bit more damage. Alright, the last thing we have on this character is our Frost Blank mobility skill and a level 1 Clarity gem. That is just to give us a little bit of mana regeneration. Why the heck not? So that should cover all of the skill gem and support gems that this character uses. You'll notice that we are pretty starved for sockets, so we do not have a cast when damage taken setup for a guard skill like Steel Skin. You just kind of have to make do with what you have. Alright, now is a good time to talk about our Mercenary. It is actually a pretty important part of the build. Without the Mercenary active, I don't think our single target damage would be as high as it is. That's not to say that it makes or breaks the build, it just makes it a lot more relevant in the current meta where some of the content requires a lot from your character. So our Mercenary is a Dex INT Bladebitter. We are using it for the Grace and Malevolence aura. Alright, for its gear, we want to improve the effectiveness of these auras, we want to give him Culling Strike, and then we want to make sure that he's also survivable enough to not die in some of those boss encounters. First off, we're using the Learcast Festival Mask. This makes it so that we gain 50% increased damage. Then we are using Shaper's Seed. This makes it so that nearby allies regenerate a little bit of life and mana. The life regeneration should be getting converted to energy shield regeneration through Zealot's Oath, but in case it's not for whatever reason, at least the mana regeneration still applies. We've anointed this amulet with influence. This is an anoint that requires a couple gold oils. What it does is it increases the effect of non-cursed auras from your skills, meaning that Grace and Malevolence is stronger. Speaking of aura effect, we have a crafted rare chest with Malevolence aura effect, as well as increased effect of non-cursed auras from your skill. I just essence crafted it to have a little bit of resistances, so our Mercenary is resist capped. Okay, then we have double corrupted rings with Grace and Malevolence aura effect. I bought this off of trade. I think they were 1 to 2 divines each, I don't know. And then we have a string of Servitude belt with Malevolence has 60% increased aura effect. There is a double corrupted version of this belt you could get that has Malevolence and Grace. That probably costs a lot of money that we don't have. Then we have a pair of essence crafted boots that is giving us resistances, once again, just to increase the survivability and mobility of our merc. For the weapons, we are dual wielding hunter influenced daggers that give us Malevolence aura effect. It's up to 40% on each one, so both of these combined with a perfect roll should be 80% increased effect of Malevolence. You're kind of starting to see why I said that we get a lot of damage from our Mercenary. The Malevolence aura is kind of cracked as is, and doing double effect on it with a little Mercenary aura bot is going to have you dealing lots of damage. The last thing on this Mercenary is a Warlord-influenced pair of gloves. It can roll the suffix modifier of Conquest, which gives you Culling Strike on hit. So when we're doing some of those tougher boss fights, our Mercenary actually gives us Culling Strike. And all in all, let me see if I can go into the ledge or something, and we can demonstrate what the Mercenary is providing us. Alright, so give me a second. Alright, in this case, I think we can use the tooltip DPS. So with the Mercenary active, we have 422,000 chaos damage per second per layer on Blight of Contagion, and we have 31,000 evasion rating almost. So let me just dismiss the Mercenary, or no, sorry, let me reserve the Mercenary, guys. If you dismiss it, you lose the Mercenary. Please don't do that. Okay, so we reserve him, and without Malevolence and Grace, we are now at 210 chaos damage per second and only 11,000 evasion rating. So this stupid Mercenary is giving us more evasion rating than the Mageblood. How crazy is that? So to sum it up, how effective is the Mercenary for this build? You're getting at least 50% more damage on your character than you otherwise would have if you had no Mercenary, okay? Remember that having the Mercenary also increases monster life, so that needs to be taken into account when you compare it to the DPS increase it is giving your character. Alright, now it's time to talk about the passive skill tree. Normally when I do passive skill tree, I do a point-by-point analysis and I walk you through the progression, leveling, maps, all that stuff. We cannot do that on this build, guys. This is a high-budget build that does some really weird things with its passives. So there's not going to be a very intuitive way on how to get you from start to finish. Instead, all I can do is show you the finished product and tell you why I took each one of those things. It's going to be up to you to try and figure out how you're going to spend those points while leveling up. In fact, I would just recommend using a Twink leveling guide instead and getting this character to like level 95 before you switch to Blight of Contagion. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Alright, so our character is level 100 and our Ascendency, we'll start with that first. We are an Occultist, so the points we have taken is Forbidden Power. This gives us +1 to maximum power charges. Also gives us increased area of effect and increased damage per power charge. Alright, then we have Vile Bastion. This gives us a little bit of energy shield regeneration per second. It also makes us stun immune while we have energy shield, which is always because we are Chaos Inoculation. So if you have no ES, you are dead. And then it also makes it so your maximum energy shield is increased by chance to block spell damage. This has very good synergy with the Willclash unique helmet. So we have 75% chance to block spell damage, that is 75% increased maximum energy shield. Then we have Void Bacon, giving us minus 20 chaos resist to nearby enemies, and then the more important modifier is actually nearby enemies have 100% reduced life regeneration rate. This prevents enemies from regenerating life, whether they're standing on consecrated ground, or maybe sometimes you have Maven influencing the map boss doing Vitality Boon, or otherwise they just have the rare life regen modifier on them. Okay, this negates all of it. It makes it so our damage over time ability can always do damage without being counteracted by life regen. Alright, and then for our last Ascendency, we took Withering Presence. It gives you 15% more chaos damage, it makes nearby hindered enemies deal 15% reduced damage over time, and every second you inflict a Wither on enemy. This is our only source of Wither generation on the build. We have no other way of applying Wither. Wither makes it so enemies take increased chaos damage, and it stacks up to 15 times. So in those longer boss fights, the Wither ramp is going to improve your single target damage as the fight goes on. Alright, the 60% increased chaos resistance here is wasted because we are CI, but that's okay. Now that we're done talking about the Ascendency, let's talk about where on the passive tree we need to go. Okay, first of all, we need to exit the Witch area and go topside. Here we get +1 to maximum power charge from Instability. We need to do the same thing in the Templar side. We need to get Overcharge for +1 to maximum power charge, and then we need to go to the Shadow side to get Infused for another +1 to maximum power charges. Okay, these are the most important parts of the build. It doesn't matter what else you do with your points. If you do not get these +1 to maximum power charge nodes on your power charge stacker, you're gonna feel pretty weak. Okay, so we need to go top of Witch, left of Templar, and right of Shadow. That's where our character needs to be in terms of passive skill points. Okay, so 3 power charges from the tree, 1 from the Ascendency, 1 from the Corruption on the hat, and 2 from the shield. In total, we will have 10 power charges, okay? That's how we're getting all our power charges on this character. So now that we've done talking about the power charges and what to get them, let's quickly go over the keystones that this build uses. I briefly mentioned them in the introduction part of the video. So I guess we'll just go from this side and then do a little clockwise pattern, okay? So in the Templar side, we have Zealot's Oath. This makes it so life regeneration is applied to energy shield. Then we have Inner Conviction here in the Witch side. This comes from a Timeless Jewel that we put into this jewel socket over here. Militant Faith, I'll talk more about that later, but what it's doing is it's converting minion instability here into Inner Conviction, and Inner Conviction gives us 3% more spell damage per power charges. And then the next keystone we need is Chaos Inoculation. This makes us immune to chaos damage, and it also makes our maximum life 1. It's just really good because we do not have the suffixes to get chaos resistance on this build, so instead we just become immune to chaos damage and we are good to go. Next up we have Leath Shade, which helps us mitigate damage over time effects. I mentioned that this build is weak to damage over time as well as physical big hits. Okay, so Leath Shade is going to help us mitigate damage over time effects and make us a little bit more durable. It'll give you time to react and move out of whatever is dealing the damage over time. The last keystone we have is Ghost Dance. This synergizes with the evasion rating we have on the build. It makes it so that every 2 seconds you gain a Ghost Shroud up to a maximum of 3, and when you get hit, you lose that Ghost Shroud to recover energy shield equal to 3% of your evasion rating. Okay, so it's just a little bit of ES recovery on hit. The downside of this is cannot recover energy shield to above evasion rating, so if for some reason you lose evasion rating, maybe your Mercenary dies, or you hit a red Eldritch Altar that removes evasion rating and armor, your ES is going to drop, and you will probably die, so be careful of that. Now with the keystones out of the way, let's talk about the jewels that we have on this build. Once again, we will start on the left side here and then go clockwise. Here we have the Storm Shroud unique jewel. It's going to make it so that modifiers that give you chance to avoid being shocked apply to all elemental ailments. In short, this gives us elemental ailment immunity when combined with the Mageblood chance to avoid being shocked flask suffix. So we get a 100% chance to avoid being shocked with this, as well as Mageblood, and then you put on this jewel, and now you are Elemental Ailment immune. Alright, our next jewel socket here, we're gonna skip this one, we'll save that for last. The next jewel socket here is the Timeless jewel I mentioned, that is the Militant Faith. You want it converted by High Templar Dominus, and you want to make sure that the modifiers on it have something that is useful for your build. In this case, we have channeling skills deal increased damage per 10 devotion, and +2 to all elemental resistances per 10 devotion. Alright, so those modifiers can vary. I picked one that I needed for my build. It helps us LE res cap, and it makes us deal more damage. So devotion is a mechanic that comes attached to the Militant Faith jewel. Basically, everything you see in this circle is being converted or added on as devotion. If it's an attribute node like +10 to int or +10 to strength or dex, that is converted to +10 to devotion. And then for the other nodes in the circle, there is a chance it is converted into a brand new node. We do not want that. Or there's a chance that the nodes that exist have devotion added onto it. So you'll see here that all of these nodes have +5 devotion, and that's what we're looking for, okay? So Militant Faith, converted by High Templar Dominus, it's giving us the Inner Conviction node, it's turning attribute points into devotion, and we want to pick a seed that doesn't convert any of our notables into devotion, it just adds on instead. Alright, with all of these things combined, you can see how much elemental resistance I'm getting from this node. So if I take it out, alright, we are getting 30% elemental resistances. Alright, so that is the Militant Faith Timeless jewel. The other jewel we are using on this build is a rare Viridian jewel. This is giving us a chance to block spell damage while holding a shield, damage over time multiplier, chaos damage over time multiplier, and then the fourth affix is a dead affix. I just didn't have enough money to buy a perfect jewel, okay? And I think we are using one more jewel over here by the shadow side. This is our Watcher's Eye, giving us increased maximum energy shield, life, and mana. And then it's giving us increased damage over time multiplier while affected by malevolence, and 15% chance to suppress spell damage while affected by grace. Once again, the immunity to shock while affected by Purity of Lightning mod here is a dead mod. I do not have currency to get perfect items. Instead, we bought a 3-mod Watcher's Eye with 2 relevant mods, okay? So this is really important. Without this jewel, we cannot cap our spell suppression. Alright, and keep in mind that we're getting Malevolence and Grace from our Mercenary, so while I'm sitting in Hideout, or if you're just looking at the POB, it's going to say spell suppression chance is 91, but as soon as we go into maps, that's going to go up to 100, and we're going to get all the damage benefits from having Malevolence. Alright, and that is all of the jewel sockets that this character uses on this build. Now let's talk about the little notables that we take on this character, as well as the Masteries. We'll start at the left and go clockwise again. So here we have Sanctum of Thought, giving us increased energy shield and reduced extra damage taken from critical strikes. This goes well with the Armor and Energy Shield Mastery, which makes it so we take reduced extra damage from critical strikes again. So 30% here, 20% here, and 25% from our shield. That gives us 75% reduced extra damage taken from critical strikes on our build. Very nice. Alright, here we have the Storm Shroud unique jewel I already talked about, Overcharge for +1 power charge. Then we take Faith and Steel for some elemental resistances and increase maximum energy shield. Right, these nodes do also give you armor, but our character has no base armor to work with, so you're scaling a very low value, so I'm just not going to read anything that has to do armor when we talk about it. Alright, and then here is our second Armor and Energy Shield Mastery. This makes it so you recover 5% of your energy shield over 1 second when you take physical damage from an enemy. Physical damage is our weakest point, so anytime we take a physical hit, we will recover some ES, and that is very nice for our survivability. Alright, going up here, there is Zealot's Oath. We talked about that. Here is Arcane Guarding. This is giving us 10% chance to block spell damage while holding a shield. You also get 60% increased energy shield from equipped shield, but this is not a high ES shield. It's just a little cherry on top. We did have to take one of these small nodes here to cap our spell block at 75%. Okay, without this node, you would have 71% spell block, so make sure to take this small node here. Alright, once again, skipping this cluster jewel setup here because I want to talk about that last. Then we have Energy Shield on Unnatural Calm over here. It's going to give you +1 in maximum light res, as well as 18% increased maximum energy shield. And then we want to take Energy Shield Mastery so that we have 10% less physical damage taken while on full energy shield. Right, this is going to help us mitigate the physical damage we take because we need all the help we can get. Up here is a power charge cluster. So we have some mana regeneration, we have critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier, which is useless for our build, followed by Disciple of the Forbidden. The only thing that is of value here is 8% increased damage per power charge. Okay, it also gives you access to Charge Mastery, where you can get 3% increased damage per Endurance, Frenzy, or Power Charge. 3 times the 10 we have is going to be 30% increased damage, so that's the value of this node over here. And then we have Instability for +1 to maximum power charge. We already talked about the Militant Faith we put over here. Then we take Mystic Bulwark here. This is 6% chance to block spell damage, and you get increased mana regeneration rate per 1% chance to block spell damage. So we have 75% chance to block spells. That's 75% increased mana regen. Then we take Prodigal Perfection. This is increased mana, as well as 2% increased spell damage per 100 mana up to 40%. I think it's just giving us a little bit of spell damage and a little bit more mana to work with and cast our spells. For Mana Mastery, we want to take 12% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. This is going to help you use more auras. Then we take Arcane Will, which is giving us some flat mana regeneration per second and increasing our maximum mana. And then we also want to take Arcane Focus, giving us increased maximum energy shield. And also, guys, you might be thinking maybe some of these nodes here aren't all that efficient, but because of the Militant Faith, we are getting Devotion from having all of these nodes, meaning we are getting Elemental Resist and a little bit of channeling skill damage from all that devotion. Alright, then next up we have Spell Damage Over Time Multiplier. This is a new cluster added in patch 3.26. It's basically going to give you damage over time multiplier with your spell skills. The Mastery here is not very good for our build, so we replace it with a Rune Graft of the Gemcraft instead, giving us +1 to level of all non-exceptional support gems. Basically, any support gem here you see that isn't Enhance, Empower, or Enlighten gets +1, and that compounds to add a lot of damage to our build. Okay, we talked about this Jewel Socket. You'll see here that we exited the Witch side using the Intellect nodes, and we have applied 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tattoos of Hinokora Death Warden, giving us 6 times 9, which is 54% reduced effect of curses on you. This combined with the Nameless Ring makes it so that our character is curse immune. Okay, we have 100% reduced cursed effectiveness, and that is very nice. Then we have this cluster over here, Arcane Expanse. Spell skills have increased area of effect. This is very important so that we can increase the AoE of our Contagion skill and clear more monsters with one cast. It also gives us access to Caster Mastery, which is giving you a 25% chance to open nearby chests when you cast a spell. That is very meta right now with all of the Abyss strats, with the Hordes, and all these other things requiring you to open chests, so make sure to get Caster Mastery. It's very nice. Now we are in the shadow side of the tree. You want to get these Spell Suppression and Energy Shield nodes over here, leading up to Instinct, making it so you recover 50 Energy Shield when you suppress spell damage. We also want to take the Prevent 3% of suppressed spell damage Mastery over here. That is going to make it so spells deal less damage to you when they are suppressed, which is all the time because we have Spell Suppression cap. And then next we want to take this Life and Energy Shield cluster leading up to Written in Blood. This is going to give us some strength as well as increased maximum energy shield. We want to take the Energy Shield Mastery that gives us regenerate 2% of energy shield per second. That will help us mitigate some of the damage over time effects in maps. Right, and then we want to go down here. We want to take damage over time multiplier and life regeneration, leading into growth and decay. I think these damage over time multiplier nodes are quite good, but if you want to save a point and get some life regeneration instead, that works too. It really depends on how much damage your build is doing and whether or not you're happy with that amount. Okay, so take life regen for survivability or take damage over time multiplier for more damage. What is next? We want to go top side here. We want to take Chaos Damage Over Time multiplier nodes leading to Atrophy. Atrophy is going to give you increased skill effect duration and increased chaos damage. Here we want to take Chaos Mastery so we deal 10% more chaos damage to enemies that have Energy Shield. A lot of bosses have Energy Shield, and since we are not depleting them with any other sorts of damage, this is just going to be 10% more damage to some of the tankier enemies in the end game. Right, then we take Chaos Inoculation, already talked to you about that, and then we want to take Whispers of Doom so we can apply an additional curse. Alright, this gives us at least 2 curses on the build for our Bane setup, and then if you have the Corrupted Amulet with +1 to additional curse, you can use 3 curses with Bane. Right, then we are headed towards the Shadow side, so Infused is the maximum power charge here. Already talked about the Watcher's Eye, we talked about Ghost Dance. That leaves this last notable over here, Soul Thief. This is a very important notable, guys. Not only does it give you increased evasion rating and maximum energy shield, it gives you recover 2% of energy shield on kill, right? The recovery portion of this notable is very important for Risk Scarab strats, because sometimes you run into affixes that makes it so you cannot naturally regenerate your ES. Instead, you have to kill enemies and recover it using this recovery mechanic instead. Right, and that should cover all of your points spent up till around level 93 if you killed the bandits for the +1 passive skill point, but I'm considering respeccing that into helping Alira for the elemental resistance instead. And then our last 7 points from 93 to 100 we spent on this Megalomaniac here. Now, this seemed like a good idea when I first bought it, but the longer I think about it and the more I play this build, I think this is a wasted 7 points. So let's look at what the Megalomaniac here is doing. It's adding 3 cluster exclusive notables to our build. So we have 10% to all elemental resistance here, which, like I said, you could just help Alira and get 15 instead. Then we have Touch of Cruelty, which is giving us chaos spells have chance to hinder enemies on hit. None of our spells actually hit, so that is useless. Instead, we are relying on curses to hinder enemies, but enemies that are hindered do take 10% increased chaos damage, which is kind of nice. Then we have Victim Maker, which makes enemies have malediction if 33% of the curse duration has expired. This seemed like a good idea, but it is anti-synergistic with the Fated End unique ring. So all of these Megalomaniac cluster passives are useful for our build, but they're not optimized in any ways. I think if I sit down, I can find a better option, maybe a better Megalomaniac, maybe a cluster jewel, maybe we can save up for our voices and just use some rare jewels instead, okay? So up to level 93, the build is really good, really efficient. The last couple points, I think I kind of fumbled. We'll try and think of something that is a little better over here, okay? So don't worry too much about the Megalomaniac, and if you don't have the +2 10 resistances from here, you can just respec your bandits, help Alira instead of kill them all, and you'll be good to go. Alright, let's talk about Pantheons real quick. You're going to want Soul of Abberath so that you're unaffected by Burning Ground. Burning Ground is going to chew through your ES and it's going to make you die. And then we're using Soul of Lunaris. This is really important to run when you have a Mercenaries, just for the avoid projectiles that have chained modifier. Without that, your Mercenary will get eviscerated, and so will you as soon as a monster spawns with the chain affix. And that brings us to the end of the guide portion of the build. I want to wrap things up by talking about further upgrades, because believe it or not, even a high budget setup can always have more currency thrown at it to improve your survivability, your damage, or your utility. Alright, we'll start with the Amulet. Instead of using Replica Dragonfang's Flight, you could have a Focus Amulet that has been Reflected Mist to have +8 to Chaos Skill Gems, as well as 100% damage over time multiplier for your Blight. Alright, so that is going to be a very expensive mirror tier item. And then we can talk about the ring. You could have at least one synthesized ring with the implicit of +1 to maximum power charges, and then you would reflect it using a Calandra's Touch, so you would just craft it to have affixes that are useful for your build, okay? And then you could have a total of 12 power charges instead of 10. Right, you could get a 3 mod Watcher's Eye with 3 modifiers that are relevant to your build, so you'd have the Malevolence, you'd have the Suppress with Grace, and then you could have something that works with Zealotry or Clarity, whatever you think is good for your build. Alright, you can improve your rare jewels so that they have 4 relevant modifiers. Alright, and like I said, with the last 7 points, you could put in a cluster jewel here, maybe a voices, it's up to you, and you could improve your build even further. Alright, but all of that is a little bit unnecessary. This build can already do most of the content in the game with a regular high budget setup like this. You don't need mirror tier gear, but you do have the option if you are really enjoying this build. The last thing I forgot to mention, guys, is that this mana flask we have here, this is where you get your immunity to bleeding from. from, bleeding will absolutely rip through your ES, so make sure to have the of sealing suffix on your mana flask so you have immunity to bleed. And with that said, I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. This video and build was a lot of fun to make, and I think it is one of the best builds I've played in Path of Exile 1. Maybe even better than the Ice Nova of Frostbolt's Hierophant setup that I was running in patch 3.25. So if you guys like that build, give this a try, let me know if you like it. And speaking of liking things, make sure to like this video if you found it useful, and to subscribe for more Path of Exile 1 content. I'm going to leave you guys with some footage of the final phase of Uber Maven, just to show you what the build feels like to play against the Uber Pinnacle bosses. But with that said, thanks again, I will see you guys soon with a new video. Bye!
Stand still! Do what I say. Take this. A cascade of pain. This will not be an escape.